In this video, we're going to look at a series of programs using random number generation in C#. On the screen you see a basic setup for a program that will generate a random number between two numbers the user specifies. Remember, the random number generator will never generate the highest number in the range. It'll be between the lowest number and the next number closest to the highest number in the range. Since we're using integers, it will be the whole number below the highest number in the range. So for example, if you set the range between 0 and 15, 15 would never actually show up as a random number. The numbers are between 0 and 14. So we have two text boxes, two labels, and a button here. We've labeled our objects appropriately using standard naming conventions that have been presented throughout the course and in Programming 1. So we're going to start by double-clicking the Get Random Number button to create some code. Now, if you remember from Programming 1, creating a random number is actually a quite easy process, and other than syntax differences, the basic idea of how to create a random number has not changed in Programming 2. So we're going to create a instance of the random class here. We'll call it getRand equals new random. So we now have our instance of the class called getRand, which we can then use to generate the random number. So we're going to say int num1 equals getRand, and then we're going to use the next method of that class. The random class has a method called next that generates us a number. Now to start, I'm not going to use the text box. I'm just going to show you using hard-coded variables or hard-coded numbers. So we'll say between 0 and 15. And then we'll use a message box to put in, num1 to string. We'll put the semicolon. And then when we run this program, we should get a random number. As you see, we got number 4. If I click OK and run it again, we get 4 again. Then we get 9, then we get 6, 3, and so on. So that's our first version of the program, just generating a random number using hard-coded numbers, not numbers from a text box. Now let's go back and code it using the text boxes, and we're going to assume for the purposes of simplicity that the user knows that number 1 needs to be smaller than number 2. We're just going to make that assumption. We're not going to code for it, but for simplicity of this video, we're going to make that assumption. So the first thing we need to do is we need to get our numbers in from our text boxes. Now in Visual Basic, we could simply say int rand1 equals txt num1.text. Now in C#, we can't do this. As you see, we get an error, cannot implicitly convert string to int. In VB, unless option strict was on, which you learned about in Programming 1, the IDE or compiler would do implicit conversions. C# is what's called a strongly typed language, which does not support this. So we need to do a conversion. We could do a try-catch, which you should do, but again, for simplicity, we're going to assume that they only put numbers in to the boxes, so we're going to simply do conversions. Now, in the real world, you wouldn't want to do this just like this without a try-catch, because if the user types in a non-numeric value, the program is going to crash. If I type in apple, it's going to try to convert apple to an integer. Well, it can't do that. So a try-catch would be the best way, but like I said, for simplicity in this case, I'm going to skip doing it. However, in the program that you write using these examples, it would be a good idea to follow that and use a try-catch here in this case. Alright, so there's our numbers in. Oops, not text num2, txt num2. So there's our two numbers into the program. Now instead of down here, instead of 0 to 15, I'm going to type in rand1, rand2. Now remember, again, whatever number rand2 is will never actually be called in the random number process. It'll start at rand 1 and work up to one below rand 2. So if I type in 0 and 100, I'll get a random number between 0 and 99. 100 itself will never actually be called. So there, in very simple terms, is a random number generator that generates numbers in a range the user selects in C#. Now, in our next modification, we're going to actually modify this to use a static variable. The way random numbers work in C#, without getting into a lengthy explanation that's quite technical, static variables tend to produce better random numbers than just using a variable. So we're going to redo this using a static variable. So we're going to come down here and we're going to say static random Now, it's customary practice to start a static variable with an underscore character. Not required. Just like a constant variable you do in all caps, it's customary in a C-based language to start a static variable with an underscore character, as we've done here. Now we're going to create a method. So we're going to say static void get random number. Now we don't need to pass anything in to this method, or do we? We could do this two ways. We could receive the input from the text boxes in the method. However, I want to do it by passing the values into the method, just to practice that, because this is a quite useful thing you'll do a lot in C#. So we've got our two values, rand1 and rand2. So let's call our method. So get random number, and we're going to put in parentheses rand1 comma rand2. Now this is going to generate an error because right now we have no method that can take two parameters, because our method down here still has no parameters. However, we're going to fix that right now, which will then fix our error. So now we have our method, our static method called getRandNumber, which is going to accept two parameters, the two numbers the user put on the form in the text boxes. Now we're going to simply take this code here and copy it down to our method. Now we need to change getRand to our new variable, our static variable, which was randnum. And now if we run the program, we will see the same results we had before, just using a method instead of doing it right in the button code. Now remember, this method now is callable again and again. The way that random numbers are created using what's called a seed value, it is, according to Microsoft, better to create one random number generator and call it multiple times than it is to create multiple random number generators. That's their official stance, so that's why we use the method, because I can call it, as you know, I can call this method as many times as I want. I could overload the method, some passing in parameters, some not passing in parameters and other times. But I can call this method as many times as I want, but I've actually only created one random number generator with this static variable right here. I'm going to get rid of this so I don't need it anymore. Oh, whoops, I need to quit my application first. So I've only created one random number generator right here, and now I can call this method that's using this random number generator anywhere in my program. I could have 5, 6, 7 different buttons, whatever, and I can still call this one random number generator. So far we've created random numbers. Well, we can do more than just random numbers. We can create other random things. Now, random is always going to be a number, but we can use C# to make it appear as if we're randomizing things other than numbers, and that's what we're going to talk about now. I've now modified the form to get rid of the text boxes and replace them with radio buttons that give us a selection, uppercase or lowercase, and instead of get random number, we're going to change this to get random letter. So back in our code, the first thing I need to do is I can get rid of this, and I'm going to replace it with one variable called isUpper. I'm going to give it a value of 0. We need an if statement now. If radUpper is checked, we're going to set isUpper equal to 1. Otherwise, we can leave it at 0. I could do an else here, but there's really no reason to do that because isUpper already has a value of 0. So if it's not 1, it has to be 0, so there's really no reason to change it. Here, instead of passing this, we're going to pass isUpper now to our get random number, which I'm actually going to change now and call get random letter. We go down here and we'll change this get random letter, and we're only going to pass isUpper to it as an integer. Now down here we need 0 to 26. Remember, the top end of the range will never be called, so 26 will never actually be called, but that's okay because there's 26 letters in the alphabet. A is 0, Z is 25. So if we do 0 to 26, we're going to make sure and call one of those numbers. Now, I'm actually going to do this a little differently. I'm actually going to create a whole different class down here. So we're going to say public class, or excuse me, public static class random letter. So now I have an entirely new class down here. So there we go. So now I have an entirely new class down here that I'm going to work with. Make sure my brackets match, and they do. So we have a class called get random letter. I don't need the parentheses, oops, because it's class, so I don't need parentheses there. So our class is called random letter. So now we need to change our method because we're actually going to return a value. The message box down here I'm not going to use. I'm actually going to use it up here. So we're actually going to move this up here, this message box dot show. I'm going to return a value of a character. So we're going to create a variable here called char letter equals get random letter is upper. So I'm going to get rid of this here and put it here. Now you see we have an error. The get random letter does not exist in the current context. The reason why is get random letter is actually now in another class. So we actually need to say random letter dot get random letter. Now down here I need to make another correction. I need a protection level. I said static void. Well, if I don't put public in front of it, it assumes it's private. Now that it's in a different class, we had a problem. So now remember, it's class name, method name. So get random letter is a method in the random letter class that I've created. Now you see we have another problem. Cannot implicitly convert void to char. I've actually created a variable now because I'm returning a value. So instead of public static void, this is say public static char. Now it's going to give me another error. All code paths do not return a value because I have no return down here. So we're actually going to change this here, get rid of this message box, because the message box is actually going to go up here now. So message box.show equals letter to string. Remember, letter is a char, so we have to convert it to string. We can't implicitly convert it, so we have to tell it to go to a string. Now, we need to create our letter here. So we're going to say char letter equals, and we've got this random number here, and we're going to use it. So we're going to say we're going to create a letter called, we're going to create a letter here, and we're going to say, we're going to make it lowercase a plus num1, then we're going to return letter. Now when I run this, right now the radio button makes no difference because I haven't coded it yet. When I get a random letter, I'm going to get a lowercase letter between A and Z. Now let's code the radio buttons. So we need to change our code here. This needs to happen only if is upper is set to 0. So let's do a little if statement there. So if is upper equal 0, then we're going to say char letter, we're going to do this. Else we're going to do this, and we're going to change this to say uppercase. Now, yes, I could have just returned letter once at the end, but this way works equally well. So now I get an uppercase or lowercase letter depending on the selection that I've made. So far we've done random numbers and random characters. All we did is take a number and convert it to a character by converting our math problem here to a char and then setting it equal to a variable. So in this video we created random numbers and random letters using random number generation in C#.